This event was established in 2014 by one of our very own Penn State Shenango students. His name is Jack Buccetti. He was a human development and family studies student. He's now a professional and an alum who comes back each year to help me coordinate this event. Jack's giving a wave back there in the green shirt. Everybody say hi, Jack.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming.
So, Jack, thank you so much for being my co-conspirator in all this. It's a pleasure to continue to put this event on with you. The goal of this event is to raise awareness about issues surrounding mental health in the hopes that more people will improve their lives by feeling more comfortable about seeking help when they need it. We are thankful that all of you are here today. A couple of housekeeping things to get us started. First of all, if you have a phone and it's on, if you haven't already done so, please put it on silent or vibrate. We would really appreciate that. There are restrooms to the back of the building, men's room on the right and ladies on the left. We have a lot of food and drink. Please help yourself. I want to make sure that you get to enjoy the food and the cookies and everything that we've got back there. You'll have noticed that there is an evaluation form on your chairs. We would really, really appreciate your feedback. So at the end of the event, if you could please just take a couple of minutes and fill that out for us, and then leave it on your chair. We will come pick those up later on. Also, if you have questions during the event, there are index cards at the ends of the aisles, and I see a couple spots where I didn't put them, so I'm going to come and correct that. But on the inner aisles, there's a couple of index cards. If someone needs one, just let the person know next to you, and we'll make sure that we get you an index card where you can write your question. And when the Q&A time comes, I'll come and collect those. I want to recognize a few people real quick. First of all, Mickey Kula and the Buell Regional Health Foundation, of whom there are a few representatives here today. They awarded us a grant this past year, and without whom we would not be able to put this event on and bring our wonderful keynote speaker, Dese'Rae, stage to the Shenango Valley to share her message with you. So a quick round of applause for the Buell Regional Health Foundation. Thank you for believing in our vision of improving lives by working to reduce the stigma that surrounds mental health. I also want to recognize the students from Jackson Milton area High School. Guys, give a quick wave. Awesome. Thank you so much, and thank you for the administrators that brought you here today. Great to have you here at Penn State Shenango. After the program, please stop by the information tables in the back of the room and pick up some Standout Stigma swag. We have bracelets and stress balls. We also have some gun locks that were provided by the Veterans Affairs Administration. So if you know someone who you're concerned about, or just want to have something like that, if someone owns a firearm and you're concerned about their safety and well-being, that may be something good to have. We also have folks from the Mercer County Suicide Prevention Network at the back who have some resource information. And we also have a Shenango student, Stephanie Catalino, who has started a new nonprofit agency called Finding Inner Normalcy. And she aims to use the visual arts and multimedia and bring together folks who are using those tools for expression and well-being and mental health recovery. So, Stephanie, you're at the back. Can you give a quick wave? Please stop and see Stephanie as well. All right. I think I've taken care of housekeeping. Let's dive in. For this year's Stamp Out Stigma, we're tackling a challenging and sensitive topic, suicide. And I want to take a moment to create some space for those for whom this might be a very personal topic. Some, if not many of you here today, have lost a loved one to suicide. I know I have. Some may be survivors of a suicide attempt, or have struggled with suicidal thoughts. As a culture, we Americans perceive that talking about suicide is hard, and that's why a lot of time this is a subject that's often left in silence. That silence is what allows negative stigmas to thrive. And so the way to stop a stigma is to talk about it, even when it seems difficult. We're aware that this program today might stir up some emotions, and if it does, I want you to know that there are several Penn State Shenango's faculty and staff here today, including myself, who will be available during and after the program to talk with you and process this with, so that you don't have to leave this program today alone with difficult, unexpressed emotions. Can my helpers please raise their hands? Thank you so much to my helpers. Please come to talk to any of us if you need to talk. Other resources you should know about are the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 1-800-273-TALK. If you prefer to text, you can text the crisis text line, 741-741. Whatever you do, please know that you are important, and this world is better because you are in it. please reach out to people that you trust if you are hurting. Let's talk about some statistics for a minute. According to the Center for Disease Control, in 2017, suicide was the second leading cause of death for people between the ages of 10 and 35. The first leading cause of death was accidental death, so let that sink in for a moment. In 2017, 47,000 people died by suicide, and 1.4 million Americans attempted suicide. And this number has steadily risen since the year 2000. Let's talk about mental health statistics for a minute. In a given year in the United States, 1 in 4 Americans will experience a mental health concern. In a population of 327 million people in the US, we're talking about 82 million people. That's almost as common as the common cold. Of those who struggle with mental health conditions, only about half are going to receive treatment. Now, there's a lot being said about needing more funding for mental health, and that's very true. But for many Americans that don't seek treatment, it's not because mental health help is not available, it's because stigma stops people from being comfortable with asking for help. We live in a culture where people sometimes insult others or casually say things that someone's crazy. They toss the word around bipolar like it's an insult. We're told, pick yourself up by your own bootstraps, meaning take care of it yourself, privately, and that asking for help is some kind of a weakness. Now, that kind of comment from a family member or a loved one does nothing but multiply the shame that many already feel. Unfortunately, the result is that many people who don't feel comfortable seeking treatment, or who don't receive good care, can easily spiral into a place where their emotional pain becomes unbearable and suicide begins to become an option. The fact about seeking help is that while it can be a very vulnerable thing to reach out to somebody and trust them that they will help you, vulnerability should never be mistaken for weakness. It takes courage and strength and wisdom to reach out and trust that someone will help you make a change in your life and to recover from something like depression, bipolar disorder, PTSD, anxiety, or other mental health conditions. But recovery, I want to tell you, is absolutely possible, and there are wonderful professionals out there in this world who want to be helpers and guides. The fact is, we have a long way to go to eradicate the stigma that surrounds mental health. But what I hope to impress upon each of you here today is that taking care of your mental health and well-being is just another part of your health care. We take care of our physical health by eating right, getting exercise, seeing our doctor, taking medication. Your emotional health is a big part of you, so please don't neglect it. The fact is that when you're struggling, the act of telling can help. But in order for that to work, we need to create a climate in our culture in which we can each be compassionate supports for each other. Each of us can do our part to stamp out stigma by encouraging our loved ones to seek help when we need it and to support them in their recovery. For each of you, your words and your attitudes can create change. We need to send a message that for those living with depression, that there is no shame in that. For those who've been affected by traumatic experience, there is no shame in that. For the millions of people in this country and this world who are walking wounded with scars that you'll never see because they're on the inside, there's no shame in that. What there is hope, and there is help. If we can change the climate, if we can stamp out stigma, and in its place increase compassion, we will certainly see courageous, strong, wise people seeking treatment. And in doing that, we can ultimately save lives and improve lives. By shining a light on suicide and ending the silence that surrounds it, we can disrupt the cycles of shame, guilt, and blame that reinforce and perpetuate suicide. So I ask, as you listen to our presenters today, let's be open to the power of breaking the silence that surrounds this topic. Thank you. And now, thank you. I'd like to invite to the stage 2 members of the Mercer County Suicide Prevention Network. Please give a warm welcome to Tracy All and Anna Shears.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having us today. Thank you for hosting this event. This is a great event, a great turnout with students here. So Tracy and I are the co-chairs of the Mercer County Suicide Prevention Network. And just to let you know what our mission is, the Mercer County Suicide Prevention Network collaborates with the community to reduce the risk of suicide through education, advocacy, and support. So partnering for things like this is part of what we're doing to try and break that stigma. Some of the things on our table back there. I want to point out our purple resource folders. This is one of the resources that our group has put together. On the inside, it has local resources for crisis services for some of the surrounding counties of Mercer. And on the other side has stall flyer, we call them stall flyers. They're for different groups. So we have an adult, but there's also one for young adult and for adolescent. So it has specific crisis numbers for those different ages. So please come visit our table and get a resource folder to take home, to share with somebody else. And it also has in it, which also Tony has put on everybody's chairs, these little cards where on the one side has the national number that he indicated with the text line also. And then on the other side has our local 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week crisis number on it. We have more on the back table as well, so if you want to grab a couple, please feel free. Also on our table are some resources from the Behavioral Health Commission. The Behavioral Health Commission is the agency that can help link people to treatment and to resources. And for people who are underinsured or uninsured, we can help provide some treatment funding for those folks. So please, again, visit our table. We have some brochures and some that has the phone number on it so that you can help get linked to treatment. Or maybe if you know somebody who needs treatment, you can provide that information to them. We all have to work together to make change and to improve everybody's lives. Tracy.
Okay, so my part is just to kind of wrap this up with a what can you do today? Many times when we're out speaking, we're providing trainings, I'm having conversations with people and they're just saying to me, but what can I do? I'm only one person. So I want to just kind of task you with 3 action steps that we promote through our suicide prevention network and the awareness efforts that we do. They're very simple. One is to educate. That is to just educate yourselves by attending trainings, by attending presentations like today. Educate others by sharing information with them as well. So if you know of an event coming up, please share that with people that you know. And also educate yourself about the resources. So again, Anna highlighted the resource folder that we put together. That's very intentional, so that you know what's available out in your community and you can use it for yourselves or your loved ones. So advocate. We want you to be a part of our advocacy efforts at the Suicide Prevention Network. We meet monthly, the 4th Tuesday every month at the Behavioral Health Commission, and it's open to anyone. So be a part of that. We talk about the needs of our community and ways that we can meet those needs. Also advocate with others who might need help. So we promote that, and again, we give you the resources so that you can have those conversations. And lastly is to communicate, and that's really what we're talking about today. Have courageous conversations like we're going to have today. Like you can go forth and have, and really, it sounds simple, but it's very impactful when you just simply ask the question, are you okay? And if you'll go visit us back at our table, we have this fold-out resource card that's from the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention. It highlights some points on how to have that supportive conversation. Just be authentic and listen. And always, when you're having a conversation with anyone who might be struggling with a mental health crisis or just need more information, 3 things to remember. To remind them that treatment is available, recovery is possible, and there is always hope. So hopefully we'll talk to you later today. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy and Anna. It gives me great pleasure to invite our next presenter to the stage. This is our keynote speaker for the day. I had first seen Dese'Rae stage speak last summer at a suicide prevention conference out at Penn State University Park. I was moved by her presentation, and it occurred to me immediately I wanted to bring her here to the Shenango Valley so that others in my neighborhood could hear this message that I think is so important. Dese'Rae Stage is an artist, a photographer, a writer, an educator, an activist who lives in Philadelphia, and she's the creator of the suicide prevention and awareness website, livethroughthis.org. On her website, she shares photographic portraits that she's taken and real-life stories of close to 200 individuals from all across the United States who are survivors of suicide attempts. For this work, she has received numerous national awards. She's received coverage from the Associated Press, the New York Times, NPR, CBS Evening News. She's even been the subject of a 2017 documentary called The S Word that follows the work that she's done within the survivor community. Now, if you haven't already done so, after the program today, I want to invite you to come up to our campus art gallery, which is in the next building over. It's Lecture Hall 222. And what you'll see in there is an exhibition of her portraits of survivors of suicide as seen on her website. Essentially what we've done is taken her website and in an abbreviated way brought it into a physical space. Now, unlike other art galleries you'll visit, you are encouraged to take the portraits down from the wall. They're all held up by a single push pin. You can take them out and turn them over, and what you'll see is the name of the individual, how old they are, where they live, maybe what they do for a living, and then a quote from the interview that Dese'Rae did with them that talks a little bit about their experience, that talks about the stigma that they've perceived that surrounds the subject of suicide, perhaps about hope and recovery. There's a message there, and so if you go in and you look at the photos and you seem to connect with someone, take a moment and take it off and read it, and there's even a QR code there that you can scan with your phone and you can go to the whole interview on her website. Please check it out. I think you'll find it's a really powerful experience to go in and have that experience in the art gallery. What you'll see from her work is that suicide does not discriminate. It impacts people despite race, gender, religious beliefs, socioeconomic status. If you take the time to read the interviews on her website, as I did throughout the summer, you may find that your compassion for others grows by leaps and bounds. These stories are amazing, they can be heart-wrenching, and they are hopeful. So, with that, please help me in giving a warm welcome to Dese'Rae Stage.
Hey guys, can everybody hear me? Back of the room? Awesome. I'm gonna do some stuff real fast. Okay. I gotta turn the clicker on. I don't remember how to do it now. There we go. All right, I'm Des. So I'm going to tell you guys more about my story tonight, but briefly, photographer, artist, mom, dog lover, tattoo lover, human. I've been living with suicidal thoughts since I was about 14 years old. I have attempted suicide twice. I've lost friends to suicide. I've seen the aftermath of a public suicide. I've seen it from every angle that, more angles than I would care to, honestly. I lost my first friend to suicide when I was 15. He was 16, his name's Brian. And I was having those thoughts myself, and I started to feel like this is the thing that I'm gonna do when I get older. And so that compelled me to dedicate my life to making change around suicide. And in 2010, I started this project called Live Through This. And so I'm gonna give you guys a brief intro via video right now. Live Through This is a series of portraits and true stories of suicide attempt survivors across the United States. So the catalyst for starting the project was personal experiences I had with depression, with self-injury, with my own suicide attempt, and I also lost friends to suicide. And I noticed that we don't talk openly about our personal experiences with suicide and with suicidal thoughts and suicidal feelings. And I just wanted to change that.
Live Through This is important because it's important for people to see that there's hope after an attempt and that there's people out there like them and they're not alone. Not feeling alone is a big deal as a human being.
If people don't understand it, this might give them a chance to see, like, you know, there's a human here, you know. It is something I think that a lot of people maybe deal with at some point in time, and it's nice to just have some solidarity there for them and with them, you know.
A lot of suicide attempt survivors have never told the story from front to back because they've never been encouraged to. So I give them that space. And afterwards, I make a portrait.
To see people's souls within their eyes, it was amazing. To be able to create that bond that you're not alone, it could help so many others.
I've seen suicide from so many different angles, and so I understand it from an academic perspective. But more importantly, I understand it from lived experience, from a very personal perspective. So when I sit down with somebody and they tell me their story, they know that they're sitting with somebody who's been there too.
When I found the project, I thought, wow, fantastic. You know, this is a way for me to talk without somebody giving me a really strange look or trying to give me medication or trying to lock me up or telling me how wrong I was about something.
And to be able to have a conversation with someone else who's experienced that, you know, you're not going to be judged, and to be able to open up and be honest about that experience. I felt like I was like being heard with every single word.
I want people to come away understanding suicide better or wanting to understand it better. I want them to be more open to talking about it because one thing we know is that asking about suicide saves lives.
And we just need to reach out and say, we can talk about it, we can approach it, it does happen, and the more we're scared of it, the more difficult it can be for people who face it because they know they have nowhere to go. And that feeling of having nowhere to go and no one to speak with kind of makes it worse in the first place.
It connects us to our stories, not only for the stories that we're reading of other attempt survivors, but the stories that are untold within ourselves. And it gives us hope and an opportunity to know that recovery is possible.
The story's ready to be told to everybody. Get it out there. Let people see that I'm a regular human being.
When I listen to the stories of suicide attempt survivors like me, I don't hear weakness. I don't hear selfishness. I hear courage. I hear compassion. I hear resilience. I hear survival. I hear life. You know, this project is not about death. This project is about life. That's why I called it Live Through This.
The people who are on that brink, they say, like, listen, like, there's a whole nother side to this. There is so much love in the world still. So, like, soldier on, man. You know what I mean?
We did that interview with Joey, the last guy, about 6 years ago. So I've seen his interview many times, and I still get goosebumps every time he talks. So the most basic goal of Live Through This is to normalize the conversation around suicide. I want to show everybody I can that the experience of suicidal thoughts and actions are tied to trauma, adversity, difficult life circumstances that can feel really impossible to manage in a moment. And sometimes, but not always, to mental health differences. I think that's really an important thing to note. I think anyone is capable of feeling this. Anyone can go down this path. I attempted when I was 17 and again when I was 23. And then I took that out into the world with me, and it was this thing in my life that didn't really make much sense. I knew suicide happened. At that point, I had lost 2 or 3 people to suicide. I knew, but no one was telling their stories. I knew there had to be other people like me who lived, but I didn't know where they were. There was this total absence of stories like mine. But there were statistics, and no people. All I saw were numbers. See, I got funnies. And the thing about the numbers that we have in terms of statistics are that they might not even be accurate. Like, we're not even sure. When we say that women attempt suicide 3 times more than men, or that men die by suicide 4 times more than women, we're missing the whole middle of the spectrum, because there are people who see gender differently, so we might be missing them. There are death reporting isn't accurate. People don't always report a suicide death as such. Opioid abuse confuses things. So the numbers are not, we're not sure, and it's probably a larger impact than we even know. And suicide attempts aren't reported. A lot of suicide attempts aren't reported at all. So yeah, suicide manifests itself completely differently from people with racial, ethnic, and cultural backgrounds that are different. Yeah, so all of that said, I'm looking around. Let's stop doing that. I'm looking around. There are no faces other than mine. There are no names, no stories to connect these experiences to. So I decided that I was going to change that. That was really ambitious. The idea was simple, though. I wanted to ask attempt survivors to tell me their stories about their experiences with suicide, and then I'd make a portrait. And it was really hard to actually begin. Like, just a simple idea. It was so hard to find people, like I said. I did Craigslist. Craigslist is how I started, but I'm not going to talk about that too much. So yeah, I called the project Live Through This because it's what we did and it's what we do. So why me? What makes me uniquely qualified to be undertaking this? I have a bachelor's degree in psychology. I have crisis intervention training and assist and QPR. I am a professional photographer. I'm self-taught. And in teaching myself photography, I photographed a lot of musicians, and eventually I started interviewing them as well. So those skills kind of came together in their development. And then the last thing, the most important thing, is that I have this lived experience of this, these several experiences with suicide. And that's the important part, because when I sit down with an attempt survivor, they trust me because they know I've been there. And they don't have to know anything about me, but they know that I'm not going to judge them. I'm already thirsty. So, process. When I sit down with an attempt survivor, my prompt is this. Tell me your name, how old you are, what you do, and your story as you see fit to tell it. And that last part's important. I'm giving them a neutral platform to say whatever it is they want to say about their experiences, good, bad, what led up to their attempt, what it feels like to be suicidal, what happened after, how they survived, how they're still struggling. And they're in control of their narrative the whole time. I want them to share only what feels safe, because kind of sometimes resharing these things can be re-traumatizing. So I want them to feel safe in doing what they're doing. I want them to feel proud of telling their stories. But having control. As attempt survivors, we're often put in positions where we lose our control. Our autonomy is taken away from us. People make decisions for us when we are considered incapable of doing that. So this can lead to more trouble, more mental health issues, more suicidal thoughts. So when I've got these people with me, I want them to feel safe. I want them to always feel like the power is in their hands. And what I do is I just listen and I hold space. I don't have my cell phone with me. It's the only time I don't have my cell phone with me. And I'm there for them. Because they're telling their stories for the first time, most of them, and usually to a stranger. I've interviewed several of my friends at this point, but they're not in the majority. So all they really know about me is that I've been there. It's part of my experience. And I know this seems like a simple idea, and it probably doesn't seem particularly groundbreaking or particularly special, but you have to realize that for so many of us, being able to talk about this at all is new. Like I said, I started the project in 2010, and at that point, I didn't feel comfortable saying the S word. And even still, like, I live in Philly, so I take lifts a lot, and sometimes I'll get in the car and people will be like, what do you do for a living? And I'm like, oh, am I in the mood to do this today? So there's like one of two answers. It's I shoot weddings and I make portraits, which is true, or I do suicide prevention work. So it can still be hard to have that conversation. And now I'm a mom, so I'm just exhausted, and sometimes I don't want to. But being able to talk about it is new. When we're doing the interviews, we usually talk for about an hour, sometimes more. And when they're done telling their story, I'll ask clarifying questions, whether they have thoughts on a specific topic, like medication or treatment if they haven't talked about it. But generally, the interview itself is unstructured. They're driving it. And afterward, I make a portrait. You've seen several of them now. I take them outside, and I ask them to just look into my lens. I don't tell them whether to smile or to be serious, so you probably saw a good amount of different expressions. Zoe does not look pleased. We had a long interview. What you see in these portraits is what they were feeling on that day. It's kind of like a time capsule. A lot of the time because I moved too quickly in the beginning of this process, I had a huge backlog of stories. So sometimes it would take me 2 or 3 years to get a story up. And so it really does feel like a time capsule to them. So they can go look at the story and go, oh wow, this is what my story was this many years ago. What is it like now? Is it better or is it worse? But it's also a reminder that they chose to stay that day, that they were able to stay that day despite their struggles. And the other important thing is I focus on the eyes for a reason. Something we have always done is looked away from suicide, from loss survivors, from attempt survivors, from anyone who's kind of experienced this, from the idea itself. Like, we don't like to say that word. So I'm asking you to make eye contact. I'm asking you to look these people in the eyes. When it comes to who I interview for the project, anybody, everybody, whoever wants to show up, if they're willing to show up, I'm willing to show up. Wow. So demographics. I think I have more material here than I've got time for. On the website right now, this is the breakdown. In the beginning, it was mostly white people who identified as women who were sharing their stories. And then as time has passed, we've got more, it's a little closer to kind of the national, what the breakdown of demographics are in the United States in general. So 25% LGBTQ people, 23% people of color, different races and ethnicities, some trans and non-binary folks, some 27% of people are ascribed to a faith, and we've got people from 19 to 69 in there. So it's this really like wide range of human beings who are involved. Let's see, and then themes, major themes that come up in these stories. There are a lot of things that come up over and over and over again. One of them is treatment. Treatment's probably the biggest one. I recently partnered with the Thomas Joyner Lab at FSU in Florida. Thomas Joyner is one of the leading researchers on suicide. And so we wanted to look at what people thought of the mental health services that they'd received in this project, or people in the project and what services they received. We used 96 narratives, and 94% of them said, okay, we've done mental health services at some point in our lives. And what this tells us is that we need to train more healthcare providers. I don't think that most people know this, but clinicians, so psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, most of them don't have training in suicide, in how to prevent suicide, how to manage a crisis. It's not mandatory in a lot of places. So this is telling us we really need to work on that. We've got positive experiences. The key positive experiences are a good relationship with a therapist, therapy that's pushing new perspectives, things like that, things that feel obvious but that aren't because they're not coming through. Negative experiences, bad meds, a bad rapport with a provider, infrastructure related stuff, forced treatment. And then the last piece is that access to care is still really hard for a lot of people. You know, that could be a socioeconomic thing, that could be when we're in rural areas, there's not much to go around. And then the other thing is that suicidal thoughts persist over time, I've noticed. I ask people 2 questions in every interview. The rest of it is completely unstructured, but one of them is suicide still an option for you? And what I'm trying to capture is what I thought was going on in my life. So you'd hear like, it gets better, but it wasn't getting better for me, or it was getting better and then it was getting worse and then it was getting better. I was like, I don't know, this is weird. But suicide never came off the table. So I asked people, and what they say is, yes, it's still an option, but no, I don't want it to be. And I think that's really important, because we've got this story that we've been told over and over by the media, which is something bad happened, a suicide attempt happened, they got help, and then they were better forever. And I think that's unfair. That's an unfair expectation, because then you have people who are like, oh no, I'm not better forever, what now? So I think if we're more honest about that, we can kind of help people build up their coping skills for when it happens again. So let's see, I talked about that. Growth. The other question I ask people is, what good things have come from your experience with suicide? Because all we talk about is the bad stuff, and I know that seems like a strange question to ask. But there is a concept called post-traumatic growth. What good comes from bad experiences in your life? So I wanted to know about that. And their answer is almost always the same. It's, my experiences with suicide allow me to better understand and to help other people who have been through the same thing. I've got a 4-minute video of Ashley Lofton sharing her answer to that question.
Well, I think that there have been a lot of benefits. There have been a lot. And namely, it's had to do with other people. It's had to do with knowing what to do in situations that other people don't know what to do. And I have an anecdote. Do you want to hear my anecdote?
Yeah.
My anecdote is when I believe I was a senior in college. My roommate and I went into a Taco Bell, and there was a girl sitting in the booth, all these people crowded around her, breathing fast, shaking, thinks she's having a heart attack, and she's like my age. Not that it's not possible, but I'm looking at it, and I'm like, all right, I am in the line with my roommate, I keep looking back, and I see all these people crowding around her, and I'm like, I think I know what's happening, I think I can help. And I keep looking back, and finally my roommate is like, if you think you can help, go over there, I walk over there, and this is not something I usually do because I'm not a big people person so much. Like, I like talking one-on-one, but there was a crowd of people over there. And I went over there, and I just suddenly felt very in control of the situation. And I was like, do any of you know her? No one knew her. So I was like, okay, back away. Like, stand back there, let her breathe, get away from her, and I sat across from her, and I took both of her hands in mine, and I asked her what her name was, and she told me, and it was Hannah, which I remember, and I was like, Hannah, I'm Ashley, and then I started describing her symptoms to her, and she kept nodding, and I was like, okay. Like, I wasn't a medical expert, but I was like, I believe that you're having a panic attack. And her friend was outside calling an ambulance, so if it wasn't that, I felt like okay to tell her this. I was like, I believe that you're having a panic attack. So I'm going to sit here, and you're going to breathe with me. And I sat and I breathed in really deeply and out really deeply, and I spoke to her very softly. And once I felt like I could feel her heart in her hands, I felt like her heart rate was down. I asked her, okay, what's going on, you know? And she was afraid she was going to lose her job. Like something had happened and she was afraid she was going to lose her job. So I just sat and I talked to her, and 15 minutes go by, and by the end of it she's laughing with me, and her friend comes in, the ambulance had pulled up, and she's laughing with me, and I don't know, like it was just this moment like of clarity. I felt like very emotional afterward, because it was this moment of clarity, like all of this makes so much sense right now. Like all of the stuff that I've been through before makes so much sense, because I mean, I'm sure she would have been fine if I hadn't been there, but what were the odds that I walked in there at that exact moment and that I could do that? And no one else knew what was going on, and they were crowding around her, and they were doing all of the things that I know that I would have hated, you know? And it was, I don't know, it was just one of those moments that I felt like it all made so much sense. And I was grateful that I had had the experiences that I had had.
Or that part. So yeah, those are the answers that I hear a lot of. So there's got to be something good to come out of the bad. I really do believe that. The project's home is online on that website. There are so few resources out there for us in suicide prevention in general, but especially with suicide attempt survivors, that I wanted to create something that anybody could access at any time. Accessibility is really important, and like I said, all of this stuff is really hard to come by. So when you type in the URL, you're presented with this giant grid of people who are different in so many ways, but they all have this experience of having lived through a suicide attempt, and also telling their story for the project. And Live Through This is the only project in existence where these stories are displayed in such large volume. There are almost 200 stories on the site, and in such depth. Not a single one of them is anonymous or hidden away in shadow. They all use their names, so they feel like real people. They are real people. I'm going to skip through this part really quickly because I'm running out of time, but I did a survey on the website. I started it in 2017, and I've got a ton of responses now that we went through and looked at to see who is using the site, what are they getting from it. This was a really nice quote. That makes me feel like I'm doing the right thing. But we analyzed it, and we learned that a lot of people in the project have really experienced suicidal thoughts. Almost half of them were suicide attempt survivors. Most of them have a mental health diagnosis. And all of their kind of qualitative answers follow that. There's a lot of input like this. And then people who visited the site also had loved ones with mental health and suicidal thoughts. So there's the breakdown of that. But I kind of thought that maybe there would be more clinicians, more providers, more researchers, and actually they're in the minority. They're only 7.5% of the people who visit the site are those guys. 35% of the people who participated in this survey were suicidal when they visited the website. So that's really, anytime we do this kind of work, anytime we share these messages, we always have to be throwing the resources out there because people need them. So they really liked that was on there. Let's see, impact. This is my favorite part. This project is my third baby now. It was my first baby before. But it's opened doors for so many other kinds of related work, and it's had an impact far beyond what I could have ever thought it might. One of the things that I've gotten to do is work on reporting recommendations. So I talked to a lot of journalists about how to tell a story about suicide, what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong. Don't talk about methods, don't say the word committed, all of these things that are going to change perceptions about suicide. And I've seen the change over the years. pretty intensely. The difference between the coverage of Robin Williams' death and Anthony Bourdain's death, it's completely different, the way they frame stories and stuff. I also got to consult on this Broadway play, Dear Evan Hansen. Are we familiar with it? A lot of people are really into that right now. There's a character who is in the beginning of the show, Connor. He dies by suicide. And Mike Feist, who played the original Connor, came to me and he said, how can I make this feel true? Like, what do I need to be thinking about when I'm shaping my character? And with what made Maddie run, Madison Holleran, do you guys know about her? She died in, yeah, you should know about her. I think she died in Philly a few years ago. And I talked to the author of this book because she wrote this really beautiful piece for ESPN, but it broke all the rules. It was beautiful and it broke all the rules, and I was really mad about it. And I yelled at her on Twitter, and she was like, why don't we sit down and have a conversation about this? So there's a whole chapter with me talking to her in the book about reporting. And then the other awesome thing is that this is being used as a tool. I thought, I was coming to it from an arts perspective with my academic knowledge, but mainly it was a piece of art for me. And then as time has passed, people have started using it. Therapists are sharing it with their clients, which I think is amazing. I've gotten involved with research, which I mentioned earlier, but we're doing all kinds of different things, looking at different questions. They're including people with lived experience in their inquiries, which is good because you don't want to be experimented on, you want to be a part of the research. So they're doing that now, which is really nice. And then, of course, I just lost my spot. What's the other thing? Educators. So like I said earlier, a lot of our clinicians don't actually have the training that we expect them to. So now this project is being used in clinical programs. So they're actually getting that training. They're getting to see, okay, what does a suicidal person look like? What kind of concerns might they come to me with? All kinds of different things. Like, to be able to see this used in that way, I think is the most fulfilling thing for me. My wife is a professor and she teaches it. She teaches communication disorders. She's a speech therapist, and so they bring in speech therapy, if any of you have ever been through it, they're a lot like a counselor. So to have people like that who are outside of the mental health field even, to have them have a little bit of training and be able to say, are you okay? Are you thinking about suicide? That's really huge. Let's see. The newest thing that I'm doing is this. This is a podcast I started called Suicide and Stuff, and it looks ridiculous because it kind of is. The idea was that I want to be able to talk about suicide. I want to be able to be irreverent. I want to get people's attention so that they know that they can talk about this every day. And that's why I've commissioned a piece of art to kind of get that feeling across. And I do this podcast bi-weekly with my friend Jess. We both work in the field. We're both attempt survivors. And yeah, we just want people to talk about it. It's really informal. We get on Skype and we talked initially about how difficult Suicide Prevention Month can be for people like us because we're burnt out. Sometimes Suicide Prevention Month feels like this, like a 5K, like a sprint. You're running and running and running and trying to get all this content and teach people everything. And then by October, you're like, but people still die the rest of the year. So we talked about that in the beginning. We're going to cover things like suicide in film and TV, suicide and spirituality. So we're kind of trying to open it up. And I really want to bring in some more creatives who've covered suicide in their novels and stuff. So that's going to be my way of doing that one day. What I've learned, how much time do I have? I'm almost, okay. So what I've learned. Last year, the CDC came out with this report that showed that 54% of Americans who died by suicide over a 17-year period did not have a mental health diagnosis. What was affecting them were these things. So these are not necessarily things we're thinking about when we're thinking about suicide. When we think about suicide with younger people, we're thinking depression, transitions, bullying, maybe coming out, stuff like that. But truly, it's legal issues, it's loss of housing, breakups, jobs, substance abuse. It's every hard thing. So to me, that's the biggest thing I learned, is to be able to kind of break it off and go, no, suicide is it's kind of its own problem. And anytime anyone is going through a difficult time in their life, you should say, are you okay? Can I help you? Are you thinking of suicide? Find out what the risk factors are. Find out what the warning signs are. And that right there is like, that's you saving a life. Just being like, are you okay? And it could be as hard as failing a test. I mean, the way that they push us to get A's, I felt that when I was a kid. So, the other thing I've learned, Dr. Eric Beeson said this in an article recently. Suicidality exists on a continuum, and we're all on that continuum somewhere. That's another important thing. So we get so scared about suicide, rightfully, but the moment it comes up, we're like, oh God. When instead we go, okay, what's the quality of your thoughts? What are you thinking about? Is it more like you want to take an action, like you have a way that you're going to do it, you know when you're going to do it, or is it just like, it's really hard and I just wish I wasn't here? Those are two different things, and they should be dealt with differently, and there are questions that can be asked, and sometimes help needs to happen right now, and sometimes it's like, okay, well, how about if I don't leave you alone, we hang out, we can figure out what works for you. And there are different ways of handling suicidality, so I really like that he said that. And it also speaks to that idea that these thoughts can persist over time, which is what I've learned in the project. I think the nuance is important. Like we've got to break out and really talk about how complicated suicide is. I think more people would be safe that way. Goals I have for the project beyond this are changing that system of thought. I really, really, really want to change the system of thought, and I just want people to go out into the world now and know, like, this could be any of us. So how do we be better? We've got to learn about it beyond the medical model, that it gets better, to really change it, because the suicide rates have been rising consistently for, I think it's like 30 years now, definitely since 2000, but I think it's even longer than that. And what that means is that what we've been doing hasn't been working, and we've got to do more. Like, you guys are here right now, you're students, you're young. I want to see that everywhere. I want to see suicide education from kindergarten through 12th grade and beyond. There are age-appropriate ways to talk about this. I've got almost a 2-year-old, and he's going to start asking questions soon, if he ever starts talking. But he will start asking questions, and I've got to know what to tell him. Like, if anybody can't avoid it, it's me. So things like that, like, we think that not talking about it is protecting our young people. But I've interviewed people who said they felt suicidal at the age of 5. So this is not something that doesn't happen. It happens. And what we have to do is, like, just arm them with information. Let them know we love them. They can talk to us. Give them resources. Because when it comes to suicide at this point, what the numbers are telling us is it's less a matter of if it's going to happen, if you're going to be affected by it, and more an issue of when. A friend of mine who's a researcher did a study, and she said, okay, people that I'm studying, have you known somebody who died by suicide? And 47% of them said yes. So that's one of 2 people, every other person in this room. Then they said, do you know somebody who has attempted suicide? And the number went up to 63%. So that's more than every other person. So we've got to know about this stuff. I knew that someday we would lose somebody and live through this family. It's just a reality of the work. The more people that I interview, we're all at high risk, the more it was likely. Our most recent loss was Stella. Stella died about 2 weeks ago. Hold on. Stella died about 2 weeks ago, and when she told me her story, she said, I don't think humans are supposed to have that much struggle. I don't know if it's genetic, if it's nature or nurture, but I've been around long enough to know that enough of us do. And with the exponential increase in the incidence in suicide, especially with our young people in this nation, it abhors me that so little is being done about it. And I think that she's right. It hasn't been working and it's not enough. So we were talking earlier about what you can do. I think one of the things you can do is go back out in the world today and examine your attitudes about what it means to be suicidal, who is suicidal. Seek us out, listen to our stories. Like I said, there are almost 200 stories on this website. And if you go and scroll through it, you're gonna see someone who looks like you, or I don't know, who just has a look about them that interests you. Go read their story, see what they have to say. There's also a filter element at the top of the website. If you want to read a story from someone in Chicago who has bipolar disorder, you can click off those things, and if that person exists, you can go read their story. So I included that in the site so that people can peruse at the way that they want. Get trained, like we were talking about earlier, trained in crisis intervention. There is a training called QPR, Question, Persuade, Refer. You can do it online for $30. I know that's a lot of money, but most of these places are even more than that. If you volunteer for a crisis center, you can usually get this training for free. The trainings aren't perfect, but it's a start. Like I said, volunteer. Crisis text line is also wonderful. You have to be 18, I believe, to do it, but crisis text line, the suicide prevention lifeline, they always need volunteers. They can never keep up with the calls. Donate to causes you believe in, AFSP. Donate to small things like Live Through This, or if you saw Katie Hardy earlier, 6 Feet Over. Anything that you care about, donate, even if it's $1. $1 matters. $1 gets you somewhere. Call your representatives if you're feeling yelly, get their number and be like, you need to change this. Just yell at their voicemail. Sometimes I do that. And then say the S word. Like, don't be afraid of it. It is terrifying, but lean into the fear, because that's the only way that we're going to change things, because knowledge is power, and having that knowledge can change lives. So thank you guys for listening. If you want to hear my actual story, come back tonight. And there's how you can find me, maybe. Yes. Thank you guys.